Have you noticed how everything feels heavier lately? Not in a dramatic way, not in a way you can easily explain, just heavier. Your thoughts feel crowded, your mind feels noisy. Even when you rest, you don't really feel rested. You wake up already tired, not because your body is exhausted, but because your mind never truly slowed down, and you start asking questions you don't always say out loud. Why does everything feel mentally harder than it should? Why do simple decisions feel draining? Why does clarity feel so far away? Most people assume something is wrong with them when they feel this way. The Stoics did not. They believed this heaviness was not a flaw. It was a signal that the mind has lost its center. Because when everything feels heavy, it is rarely life itself that is overwhelming you. It is the way your mind is carrying it. Let me ask you something honestly. When was the last time your mind felt quiet, not distracted, not entertained, but truly clear? If you cannot remember, you are not alone. Modern life trains the mind to react, not to rest, to absorb, not to reflect, to move constantly without ever stopping to ask what all this movement is doing to you internally. The Stoics understood this pressure long before modern life gave it new names. They understood that mental clarity is not something you stumble into. It is something you train, and without rules, the mind collapses under its own weight. In this video, we will walk through 7 Stoic rules for mental clarity when everything feels heavy. Not motivational ideas, not temporary relief. Rules, principles that anchor the mind when emotion, noise, and pressure try to pull it apart. As you listen, notice which rule makes you uncomfortable. Which one feels necessary? Which one feels like something you have been avoiding? If one of them resonates, write this in the comments. I choose clarity over chaos. Not as a performance, not as a promise to be perfect, but as a quiet decision to stop letting your mind carry more than it needs to. Let us begin by understanding why mental clarity disappears in the first place. Before we talk about rules, we need to understand the problem, because mental heaviness does not come from nowhere. It builds quietly, incrementally. Most people don't lose clarity in a single moment. They lose it through accumulation. Too many thoughts left unresolved. Too many emotions left unexamined. Too many obligations accepted without reflection. The mind becomes a storage room instead of a command center. And when the mind is overloaded, clarity is the first thing to disappear. You begin reacting instead of choosing. You begin thinking in loops. You replay conversations. You anticipate problems that have not happened. You carry responsibility for things that are not actually yours to carry. The Stoics had a word for this. They called it internal disorder. Not chaos caused by the world, but chaos caused by a lack of internal structure. Because the mind, when left without principles, does not become free. It becomes crowded. Modern life trains you to absorb everything, every opinion, every demand, every expectation, every notification, every crisis that does not actually belong to you. And the mind, trying to be helpful, tries to hold all of it, but it cannot. So it collapses inward. Clarity is not lost because you are weak. It is lost because you are overloaded. Let me ask you something. How many problems are you thinking about right now that you cannot act on today? How many concerns are occupying your mental space without offering any resolution? That is not preparation. That is mental debt. And like financial debt, mental debt compounds. Rule 1. Stop letting the mind carry what is not yours. Mental heaviness rarely comes from doing too much. It comes from carrying too much, not physically, mentally. Your mind is tired not because life is overwhelming, but because it has been asked to hold things it was never designed to carry. Other people's reactions, other people's expectations, future outcomes you cannot control, past moments you cannot change. Most people live as if their mind is a storage room. Every worry goes in, every fear goes in, every imagined future goes in. Every regret goes in. Nothing is filtered. Nothing is released. And over time, the weight accumulates. This is how clarity disappears, not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, under the pressure of unnecessary mental weight. Let me ask you something. How many thoughts do you carry every day that have no immediate solution, no direct action, and no real demand on you in this moment? Thoughts like, what if this goes wrong? What if they misunderstand me? What if I'm making the wrong choice? What if I never become who I should be? Notice something important. None of these thoughts require action right now. They only require attention, and attention, when misdirected, becomes exhaustion. The Stoics understood this with brutal clarity. Epictetus said, "Some things are up to us, and some things are not." That sentence sounds simple, but most people live as if it is false. They try to control outcomes. They try to control opinions. They try to control timing. They try to control how others feel about them. And when those things inevitably resist control, the mind tightens. Tension becomes anxiety. Anxiety becomes mental fog. Mental fog becomes paralysis. This is why so many people feel overwhelmed even when nothing urgent is happening. Their mind is busy managing illusions of control. Let me say this clearly. Clarity does not come from solving everything. It comes from knowing what deserves your attention and what does not. Right now, your mind is likely carrying conversations that have not happened, failures that have not occurred, judgments that have not been spoken. You are spending mental energy on imagined burdens, and imagined burdens feel just as heavy as real ones. Here is the Stoic shift that changes everything. You do not need to remove all thoughts. You need to remove responsibility for what is not yours. Responsibility is heavy. Responsibility tells the mind, this must be managed, this must be solved, this must be held. When you take responsibility for what you cannot control, your mind never rests. So let me ask you directly, what are you carrying right now that is not actually yours to carry? Is it someone else's expectations? Is it the pressure to be understood by everyone? Is it a future version of yourself you are afraid of disappointing? Be honest, because honesty is where mental clarity begins. The Stoics did not believe in suppressing thoughts. They believed in sorting them. They asked one question repeatedly: is this within my control? If the answer was no, they refused to give it emotional weight, not because they were indifferent, but because they were disciplined. This is where most people misunderstand Stoicism. They think it is about being cold. It is not. It is about being selective. Selective with attention. Selective with concern. Selective with energy. Your mind is not weak, it is overworked, and it is overworked because it has never been taught boundaries. Imagine carrying a bag everywhere you go. At first it is light, then you add one thing, then another, then another. Eventually, you forget what you put inside. You only feel the weight. That is the modern mind. Busy, heavy, tired. Not because life is too demanding, but because the mind has been allowed to collect everything indiscriminately. Let me give you a practical internal shift. When a thought arises, ask yourself, does this require action right now? If the answer is yes, then act calmly and deliberately. If the answer is no, then release it. Not later. Not after thinking about it more. Release it now. This is not avoidance. This is discipline. This is how clarity returns. Clarity is not created by thinking more. It is created by thinking less about what does not matter. If this resonates with you, write this in the comments. I release what is not mine to carry. Not as a mantra, as a reminder. Because every time you choose to drop unnecessary weight, your mind becomes lighter. And a lighter mind sees clearly. Before we move on, I want you to reflect on this. If you removed just one unnecessary mental burden from your day, what would it be? What thought would you stop entertaining? What worry would you stop rehearsing? What imagined outcome would you stop feeding? You do not need to answer out loud, but notice what came to mind immediately. That is where your clarity is being blocked. In the next rule, we will go even deeper. Because mental heaviness is not only about what you carry, it is also about how constantly you react. And most people are reacting far more than they realize. Rule 2. Stop trying to control everything. When life feels heavy, the instinct is always the same. You try to tighten your grip. You try to manage every outcome. You try to predict every problem. You try to prepare for every possible disappointment. You tell yourself that if you can just stay alert enough, careful enough, in control enough, then maybe the weight will ease. But it doesn't. It gets heavier. Because control is exhausting. The Stoics understood something that modern life constantly forgets. Not everything that affects you is within your power, and pretending otherwise quietly destroys your peace. Epictetus said it clearly. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. At first glance, that sounds obvious, but most people do not live as if they believe it. They spend enormous mental energy trying to control other people's reactions, other people's choices, the timing of events, the fairness of outcomes, the opinions of strangers, the future itself. And then they wonder why they feel mentally drained. Let me ask you something honestly. How much of your stress right now comes from things you actually control? And how much comes from things you don't, but keep wrestling with anyway? Because every time you argue with reality, reality wins. Not loudly, not dramatically. It just keeps going. The Stoics did not teach passivity. They taught precision. They taught you to place your effort only where it produces strength. Your thoughts, your actions, your standards, your response. Everything else is noise. Most people feel overwhelmed because their attention is scattered across 1,000 uncontrollable variables. They wake up already tense, already bracing, already running simulations of what might go wrong. But clarity does not come from anticipating everything. Clarity comes from acceptance. Acceptance does not mean liking what is happening. It means acknowledging what is happening without adding unnecessary resistance. Here is the shift that changes everything. Instead of asking, "How do I control this?" ask, "What is mine to handle here?" That question immediately reduces mental clutter. You cannot control whether life is fair, but you can control whether you act with integrity. You cannot control how others treat you, but you can control how you carry yourself. You cannot control uncertainty, but you can control how much energy you waste fearing it. When you focus only on what is yours, your mind stops spinning. It settles. And in that stillness, clarity begins to return. Most people never experience this because they mistake surrender for weakness. But the Stoics saw it as discipline. It takes strength to stop fighting what you cannot change. It takes maturity to redirect effort inward instead of outward. And it takes honesty to admit how much of your suffering comes from insisting life behave differently than it does. Let me pause and ask you again. Right now, what are you trying to control that is not actually yours? A person? A result? A future version of yourself? Write this in the comments if it resonates. I focus only on what is mine to control, not as a slogan, as a reminder. Because mental clarity does not come from having fewer problems. It comes from carrying only the problems that belong to you. When you stop trying to control everything, something unexpected happens. Your energy returns. Your thinking sharpens. Your reactions slow down. The weight does not disappear, but it becomes manageable. And in the next rule, we will talk about the habit that quietly destroys clarity more than almost anything else: constant mental noise. Rule 3. Remove the mental noise before you seek clarity. Most people believe clarity is something you find, as if it exists somewhere outside you, waiting to be discovered once life finally calms down. But that belief is part of the problem. Clarity is not something you add to a noisy mind. It is what remains when the noise is removed. And most people live inside constant noise. Noise from information, noise from opinions, noise from comparison, noise from urgency that never actually leads anywhere. Your mind is rarely quiet, not because you are broken, but because you have trained it to be occupied at all times. Think about it. The moment there is silence, you reach for something: your phone, a video, music, a task, another thought. Not because you need it, but because stillness feels uncomfortable. The Stoics understood this discomfort well. They did not interpret it as boredom. They interpreted it as confrontation. When the noise fades, you are left alone with yourself, and that is where most people panic. Because silence removes distraction. And distraction is often what keeps uncomfortable truths at bay. This is why overthinking is so common. It looks like deep reflection, but it is often avoidance wearing an intelligent mask. You replay scenarios. You analyze conversations. You imagine outcomes. Not to gain clarity, but to stay busy inside your own head. Mental heaviness does not come from thinking too much. It comes from thinking without direction, from allowing every thought to have equal importance. The Stoics were ruthless about this. They believed that attention is a form of power, and power, when scattered, becomes weakness. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. Read that carefully. Not shaped by events, not shaped by circumstances, shaped by what it repeatedly entertains. If your mind is constantly consuming chaos, urgency, conflict, and stimulation, clarity has no space to emerge. This is why people say, "I don't know what I want." It's not because they lack intelligence. It's because their inner environment is overcrowded. Clarity requires margin. It requires space. It requires the courage to let the mind be quiet long enough for the important thoughts to surface. Let me ask you something honestly. When was the last time you were truly alone with your thoughts without trying to fix them, escape them, or entertain them? Not scrolling, not listening, not multitasking, just present. For most people, that question feels uncomfortable, and that discomfort is the point. Because the mind resists silence when it knows something meaningful might be revealed. The Stoics did not try to silence the mind through force. They simplified it through discipline. They reduced inputs. They limited excess. They chose what deserved attention. They understood that peace is not created by adding more techniques, but by subtracting what is unnecessary. You do not need to think about everything. You do not need to react to every thought. You do not need to carry every worry as if it were urgent. Some thoughts are noise, some emotions are static, some impulses do not deserve a response. Mental clarity begins the moment you stop treating every thought as a command. Instead of asking, "Why do I feel like this?" the Stoic asks, "Is this thought useful?" That question alone changes everything. Because usefulness introduces direction, and direction brings calm. Here is something important to understand. Silence will not feel peaceful at first. It will feel restless, uncomfortable, exposing. That does not mean it is harmful. It means it is unfamiliar. You have spent years feeding your mind constant stimulation. Of course, it resists stillness, but resistance is not danger. It is conditioning being challenged. This is why clarity feels rare. Not because it is hard to access, but because most people abandon silence too early. They mistake the initial discomfort for failure. But if you stay a little longer, something shifts. The noise begins to settle. The mind slows down. And what remains is not chaos. It is signal. If this resonates with you, write this in the comments. I allow my mind to be quiet. Not as a declaration of perfection, but as permission, because clarity does not arrive when life becomes easy. It arrives when the mind becomes disciplined. In the next rule, we will confront what often appears once the noise fades. The truth about yourself that distraction has been hiding. And learning how to face it without judgment is where real mental strength begins. Rule 4. Stop demanding emotional comfort from life. One of the quiet reasons the mind feels so heavy is because many people expect life to feel comfortable, not all the time, just enough. Enough reassurance, enough certainty, enough emotional ease to feel like things are okay. The Stoics considered this expectation dangerous. Not because comfort is wrong, but because demanding it from life creates constant friction. Life does not negotiate with your emotional preferences. It does not slow down when you feel overwhelmed. It does not simplify itself when you feel tired. It does not arrange circumstances to protect your inner state. And when a person expects it to, every challenge feels personal. Every obstacle feels unfair. Every discomfort feels like a problem to be eliminated. This is where mental heaviness begins. Not in pain itself, but in resistance to pain. Epictetus was clear about this. He said that people are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of things. Read that again slowly. The event is neutral. The demand you place on it is not. When you expect life to feel emotionally smooth, anything rough becomes intolerable. A difficult conversation feels like an attack. Uncertainty feels like failure. Effort feels like injustice. But the Stoics trained themselves differently. They did not ask, "Why does this feel uncomfortable?" They asked, "Why do I believe it shouldn't?" That question exposes something important. Many people are not suffering because life is harsh. They are suffering because they believe it should be easier. That belief quietly drains strength. because every moment becomes a negotiation between reality and expectation, and reality always wins. This is why people feel exhausted even when nothing catastrophic is happening. They are not fighting events. They are fighting the fact that events exist. The Stoic does not seek emotional comfort from life. He seeks alignment. He accepts that discomfort is part of the human condition, not a malfunction. This acceptance does not make him passive. It makes him stable. When you stop demanding comfort, your mind stops arguing with reality, and that silence creates clarity. Let me ask you something directly. When something feels difficult, is your first response to ask, "How do I get out of this feeling?" Or do you ask, "How do I carry this well?" That difference matters, because the first question seeks escape. The second builds strength. The Stoics practice something called voluntary discomfort, not to suffer unnecessarily, but to train their minds to remain steady when comfort was absent. They understood that a person who can endure discomfort willingly cannot be controlled by it. This is why mental clarity often appears after hardship, not before it. Hardship strips away illusions. It reveals what actually matters. It exposes false expectations. It forces the mind to simplify. Comfort, when constantly pursued, does the opposite. It softens discipline. It weakens resilience. It trains avoidance. And avoidance is expensive. It costs clarity. It costs confidence. It costs self-respect. When you stop demanding that life feel good, you regain authority over how you respond to it. Pain becomes information. Discomfort becomes training. Difficulty becomes data. Not drama, not catastrophe, just part of the path. If this resonates, write this in the comments. I stop demanding comfort from life. Not as a declaration of toughness, but as a release. Because clarity does not come from controlling life. It comes from controlling your response to it. In the next rule, we will address one of the most exhausting habits of the modern mind. The habit of carrying emotional weight that was never yours to carry in the first place. Rule 5. Stop carrying emotional weight that is not yours. A heavy mind is often not weighed down by life itself, but by responsibility that was never meant to be carried. Other people's reactions, other people's expectations, other people's moods, other people's opinions. Most people do not realize how much of their mental energy is spent managing things that are not under their control. They replay conversations. They imagine how they were perceived. They worry about what someone else thinks, feels, or might say later. And this constant mental surveillance creates exhaustion. The Stoics warned against this clearly. Epictetus said that some things are up to us, and some things are not. That distinction is not philosophical. It is practical. Your thoughts are yours. Your actions are yours. Your character is yours. But other people's responses are not. Yet many people live as if they are responsible for outcomes they cannot control. They feel guilty for other people's discomfort. They feel anxious about reactions they cannot predict. They feel burdened by expectations that were never agreed to. And slowly, their mind becomes crowded. Clarity disappears, not because life is complex, but because the mind is overloaded. The Stoic learns to ask one question before carrying any emotional weight. Is this mine to carry? If the answer is no, he lets it go. Not out of coldness, not out of indifference, but out of discipline. This is not avoidance. It is accuracy. Most emotional suffering comes from misattribution. You attribute responsibility to yourself for things that belong to reality, chance, or other people, and your nervous system pays the price. Think about how often your thoughts circle around questions like, did I say the wrong thing? Did I disappoint them? What if they misunderstood me? What if they think less of me? Notice how none of those questions lead to action. They only lead to rumination. The Stoics understood something important. Mental clarity is not about thinking more. It is about thinking correctly. When you carry emotional weight that is not yours, your mind cannot rest. It stays alert, hypervigilant, always scanning. And a mind that never rests eventually feels heavy. Let me ask you something honestly. How much of what occupies your thoughts right now is actually within your control? And how much is imagined responsibility? That question alone can lighten the mind. The Stoic does not try to control outcomes. He controls conduct. He focuses on what he can do well, not on how it will be received. This is why Stoics appear calm even in social pressure. They are not detached from people. They are detached from unnecessary burden. They do not abandon care. They abandon over-responsibility. There is a difference. When you stop carrying what is not yours, something changes internally. Your thoughts slow down. Your breathing deepens. Your decisions become simpler. You stop rehearsing explanations. You stop defending yourself in advance. You stop living in imagined reactions. And in that space, clarity returns. Write this in the comments if it resonates. I release what is not mine to carry. Not as a statement of indifference, but as an act of self-respect. Because a clear mind cannot exist under borrowed weight. In the next rule, we will confront one of the most common causes of mental fatigue today. The illusion that being busy means being purposeful. Rule 6. Busy is not the same as purposeful. Most people are exhausted, but not because they are doing too much. They are exhausted because they are doing too much that does not matter. Their days are full, their calendars are packed, their phones never stop, and yet, at the end of the day, they feel strangely empty, not fulfilled, not grounded, just drained. This is one of the most dangerous illusions of modern life, the belief that movement equals meaning. The Stoics rejected this completely. Marcus Aurelius warned that a person can spend their entire life busy with trivialities, never touching what actually matters. Busyness creates the appearance of progress. Purpose creates actual direction. They are not the same. A busy life scatters the mind. A purposeful life simplifies it. Mental heaviness often comes not from too many responsibilities, but from too many irrelevant ones. Think about how many things demand your attention each day. Messages that do not require action. Meetings that do not require presence. Tasks that do not require judgment. Your energy is spent reacting, not choosing. And reaction, when repeated long enough, becomes a way of life. The Stoics believed clarity begins when you decide what deserves your attention and what does not. Everything does not deserve access to your mind. Just because something is urgent does not mean it is important. Just because something is loud does not mean it is meaningful. Yet many people allow the loudest things to dominate their inner world. They confuse urgency with value. They confuse activity with progress, and their mind pays the cost. A mind pulled in 10 directions cannot feel clear. It feels heavy, fragmented, restless. Let me ask you something directly. At the end of a long day, do you feel tired or fulfilled? There is a difference. Tiredness comes from effort. Fulfillment comes from alignment. The Stoic asks a simple question before committing energy to anything. Does this contribute to my character, or does it merely consume my time? That question changes everything. When your actions align with your values, the mind settles. When they don't, no amount of productivity will bring peace. Many people stay busy to avoid stillness, because stillness forces reflection, and reflection reveals misalignment. So they fill their days with motion, noise, and obligation. But clarity requires courage. The courage to say no, the courage to disappoint, the courage to leave some things undone. Seneca wrote that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Waste does not always look like laziness. Often it looks like endless motion without direction. Purpose is not found by adding more to your life. It is found by subtracting what distracts you from what matters. When you simplify, your thoughts simplify. When your commitments narrow, your focus sharpens, and the heaviness lifts. Not because life became easier, but because it became clearer. Ask yourself this quietly. If everything you did tomorrow stayed the same, except for one thing you removed, what would create the most mental space? That answer is not random. It is instructional. Write this in the comments if it resonates. I choose direction over distraction. Not as a promise to do more, but as a decision to do less with greater intention. In the final rule, we will bring everything together, not with intensity, not with pressure, but with a calm internal reset that restores clarity even when life remains heavy. Rule 7. Return to what you can control. When everything feels heavy, the instinct is to search for answers outside yourself. You look for reassurance. You look for explanations. You look for something that will make the weight disappear. But the Stoics took a radically different approach. They did not try to control the world. They trained themselves to return inward, again and again and again. Epictetus reduced the entire philosophy of Stoicism to one simple distinction. Some things are up to you, some things are not. That is not a motivational quote. It is a psychological boundary, and boundaries create clarity. Mental heaviness grows when your attention is invested in things you cannot command. Other people's opinions, uncertain outcomes, past mistakes, future fears, external validation. None of these respond to effort. They only consume it. The Stoic does not waste energy there. He asks one grounding question. What is mine to govern right now? Not tomorrow, not next year. Right now. Your thoughts, your judgments, your actions, your restraint, your effort. This is where clarity lives. When your mind feels overwhelmed, it is often because it has wandered too far beyond its jurisdiction. It is trying to manage outcomes, trying to predict reactions, trying to guarantee comfort. The Stoics knew this leads only to tension. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that peace does not come from arranging external events, but from arranging one's own mind. You do not regain clarity by fixing your entire life at once. You regain it by returning your attention to the next correct action. Just one. What is the most disciplined response available to you right now? What is the most honest step? What is the smallest act of self-command? Clarity is built locally, moment by moment, choice by choice. Most people wait for clarity before they act. The Stoic acts to create clarity. That is the difference. You do not need to solve everything. You do not need certainty. You do not need motivation. You need direction. And direction comes from control. When life feels heavy, simplify the question. Not, how do I fix everything? But, what is mine to handle? And what must I release? Release what does not belong to you. Return to what does. Your breathing, your posture, your attention, your effort. This return is not weakness. It is strength. It is how the Stoic remains steady inside unstable conditions. Let me ask you something quietly. When your mind feels heavy, where is your attention? Is it focused on what you can command or what you cannot? That answer explains more than you think. If this resonates, write this in the comments. I return to what I control, not as a declaration of dominance, but as an act of mental discipline. This is where the weight begins to lift. Not because life becomes light, but because your mind stops carrying what was never yours to hold. And this is what Stoicism ultimately teaches. Mental clarity is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of self-command. When you govern yourself, life loses its power to overwhelm you. That is the threshold. And now you know how to cross it. Closing. The vow. If you listen closely, you'll notice something. The weight did not disappear. Life did not suddenly become easy. Nothing external changed. And yet, your mind feels quieter. That is not coincidence. That is what happens when you stop asking life to be lighter and start asking yourself to be steadier. Stoicism was never about escaping pressure. It was about becoming strong enough to stand inside it without breaking. Mental clarity is not found by fixing the world. It is found by governing yourself. Every rule you heard today points back to the same truth. You are not powerless. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are untrained. And training begins the moment you decide to stop drifting. So, make a vow. Not out loud. Not to impress anyone. A quiet vow. That when life feels heavy, you will not panic. You will not numb. You will not collapse inward. You will pause. You will return to what you control. You will choose discipline over chaos, direction over drift, clarity over noise. This channel exists for moments like that, not as motivation, not as escape, but as a place to think, to recalibrate, to remember who you are training yourself to become. If you choose to stay here, let it be a reminder. Not of comfort, but of standard. And whenever the weight returns, as it always does, you'll know where to come back to. Stay steady.